when faced with a difficult conversation, when faced with a hard message, something we're uncertain about the outcome of, our tendency as humans is to avoid. And we're hardwired to avoid. It goes right back to our tribal beginnings. So when we used to hunt and gather in tribes and we survived off our standing within the tribe, it was very dangerous to rock the boat. It was very dangerous to have a different idea and a different perspective, because if you were ousted from that group, your survival was in jeopardy. So at some level, our brain thinks, if I create tension between me and this person, I may be socially isolated. I may be kicked out of the tribe. It doesn't really work that way in reality anymore, but the brain still reacts as if it does. And I have to say, having a critical conversation is one of the most common topics I have ever talked about in my 14-year career, working with leaders to build their influence, engagement, and impact. So whether it's on a one-on-one perspective, from a coaching conversation, to working with teams wanting to build trust and work together more effectively, to leadership development programs across entire organisations, the topic of critical conversations comes up on the agenda every single time. How do we have them? When do we have them? How do we avoid them? How do we prevent them? This is the most common conversation that I'm having. What happens when you avoid a conversation as a default is that we have a tendency to prioritise our comfort over conflict. Isn't that what's happening? And in fact, it's our present comfort over potential conflict. Because remember, the brain actually can't tell the difference. We don't know what's going to happen, but the brain thinks it's going to be bad. So we prioritise our comfort over conflict. And what that means is we have them less often than we should have them. You know what I'm talking about, right? We're sitting on conversations that we probably should have, but we think, oh, we better not have them. Maybe it'll just be okay. So we don't have the conversation. So we don't get good at having the conversation. So by the time we end up having that conversation, it doesn't really go to plan. And that reinforces the reason why we didn't have it in the first place. So we're not rushing to have these conversations that we're not particularly skilled at because we're scared of the outcome of these conversations. And what I find is that humans have this really intriguing and innovative way of getting around the topic. So these conversations have to be had. We have to tackle some tough issues. And so we've created all these inventive ways to kind of beat around the bush or get the topic on the table without actually having to address the topic on the table. And you know what I'm talking about. So some of these strategies range from hoping. This was the one favoured by Phil's manager, and we all know how that went. So we hope that time will take care of it. It doesn't. We hope that maybe somebody else will take care of it. They don't. We hope that maybe Phil would just take care of it for himself. He doesn't. So of course, hoping as a strategy doesn't work. Hope is not a strategy. You've heard that, right? Then we've got the hinting strategy. This is one of my favourites. I think it's the most creative. You know, where sometimes it's not a really big deal, but you know it's an important conversation. So we just sort of drop a couple of hints, kind of like breadcrumbs, and we hope people will just stumble upon them and they will wake up to the idea for themselves. So picture this. You're with a colleague. They're about to go give a really important presentation to a room full of very important people. It turns out that they've got a, you know, how can I say this? There's a bat in the cave, people. I don't know how else to say this. There's something that's on their face that should be on their face that it's a little bit awkward to say. You've got a little... So we resort to hinting, don't we? We do the... But of course, if we're not direct enough and they're not paying attention, we might get something like this. And then they go on to embarrass themselves because we prioritised our comfort over potential conflict. We don't want to embarrass them, we don't want to make them feel bad, so we skirt around the bush and we don't actually have the direct kind of conversation. But there's another strategy. So we've gone from hoping to hinting, and then we have the hitting strategy. Now, this is not about avoiding a critical conversation. This is actually for the few people in the room, and there'll be a number of you here today, who actually don't avoid a hard conversation. Actually quite happy to go right in there and say what needs to be said. Because you know what, Anneli, at the end of the day, people just need to hear the truth. You know, you just need to give it to them straight, right between the eyes. There's no point beating around the bush. Isn't that right? People just got to hear the truth. You know what I'm saying? By the way, Janet, you got some BO love. I don't know how else to tell you this, but you're a little bit whiffy and people have been complaining. So you're going to need to up the level of deodorant. Are we good? We're good. Great. Good chat. Thanks so much. Now, that might work. It might work with Janet, depending on your level of trust, yeah? Depending on the level of respect you have for her and she has for you. And sometimes that'll fly, but it doesn't always fly. And the potential is that there is danger for bruising that relationship. Sometimes it's just too brutal for people. And these are the sorts of conversations we have. It's not just in the workplace. It's out in your communities. It's in the home front. Relationships. Relationships. Have you ever think back to your early relationships? You know, there's often a time in our lives where there's someone in the relationship who's just a little bit more into the relationship than the other one, and you have to kind of think about ways of how to have that conversation. And isn't it just awkward? There's always someone who's just a little bit more into it than anybody else. And, you know, it's really embarrassing watching this party try and be somebody that they're not. And really all you need to do at the end of the day is give them the hard truth. FYI, this show was brought to you by the courtesy of my cat Puddums and my husband Jason.